This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek. The recent attack on New York's MTA fortunately led to no deaths, but it again showed the dangerous health and safety conditions for workers and the public. I spoke with two MTA TW100 transit operators, Anthony Steiniger and John Ferretti. They are also members of Fightback, a caucus in their union local, about the social conditions, health and safety, and the massive corruption of New York politicians.
My experience that day was I was on my way to work, and I usually get on the train, the D train, which stops at 36th Street, around about 9:10, 9:15 sometime in Manhattan. And that would be about a half hour or and trains were being rerouted. And so I looked on the MTA app that I have on my phone, and it said that there was some sort of investigation at 36th Street. It didn't say what it was, didn't say exactly what had happened. So I spoke to the conductor on the train I was riding, and it was a passenger that informed us via their cell phone and their the news app that they had that it was an actual shooting there. The NTA was actually at that time, some 30 minutes after the attack, was telling employees that it was a smoke condition, or some sort of FDNY, NYPD investigation. So employees really had no idea that this horrendous attack had occurred. So by the time I did finally get to 95th Street, I had to take an Uber, which the prices were exorbitant. They price gouged everyone in South Brooklyn that day.
And Uber is price surging on a catastrophe, making money on a catastrophe. That's Uber.
Yeah, it was $42 to go from Fifth Avenue and 9th Street in Brooklyn to 4th Avenue and 95th Street in Brooklyn. It was ridiculous. Fortunately, I spoken to someone who was going in the same direction as I was, and we split the fare. But it was just ridiculous. It was horrendous. All the bus stops were packed. The buses were jam packed with people. As far as management's failure, one of my coworkers remarked earlier today that we spend every year we go to a right to know refresher, where we as train operators and conductors learn about handling hazardous materials, but we're not refreshed on handling something that is like this, which is likely to occur, an emergency situation. We receive that training not as often as we should. The last time I remember going to some sort of training that would actually help us deal with this was several years ago, when it should be, every year, every 2 years at minimum, for train operators, conductors, cleaners, station personnel, anyone that is dealing directly with the public should have proper training on how to deal with an emergency situation. I also want to give all credit to my coworkers on the R train, that train that pulled up beside that train where this madman was, whose quick thinking possibly could have saved lives. And to everyone who was in that station who actually took action to help people evacuate, get away from the area, all those people deserve the utmost, praise and thanks for helping to minimize the damage that happened that day.
And also joining us is John Ferretti. And John, the mayor has said that there's an issue of guns, that's the problem. Who's responsible for this kind of thing? It's a continuing thing of attacks on transit, on people in the streets. I mean, it really is getting out of control.
Well, it's been out of control for decades. I mean, to be honest, like transit workers know when they're told to signal en route for police, that just means shut up and suffer in silence. That's what it means. Because the police don't even know the signal. When the signal is supposed to be, was it three? Anthony, it's
one long,
one short. Yeah, one long buzzer, one short buzzer is supposed to be a signal to police for police assistance. You can't find a police officer in the New York City area that knows what the hell that means. So it's useless to us. So when rail control, our bosses tell us to signal en route for police. Basically, they mean keep the train moving, and it's your problem. Deal with it. And we've had a long history of transit worker assaults, a long history of transit workers being the Dutch boy with their finger in the dikes, trying to keep things running in this entire system, even during COVID. And basically, I used to joke to coworkers that we're basically a mobile social service unit without any social services, and that's basically what has been the case for decades. COVID just ripped the gaping wound off of that problem that's been going on in society for a long time. What we have is complete and total social dysfunction. And the reason why we have that is because we don't tax the rich to pay for the services that are really necessary to solve the problems that we face. Problems of issues with mental health, a lack of a punitive approach to everything. The solution for everything is more cops. We spend $10 billion a year as a city on policing, yet their solve rate is like less than 30%. The cops that were on the scene on that day at 25th Street on that train that they saved all those customers to get them to 25th Street away from the shooting scene. You have injured customers shot. And what is the response of the police officer? Oh, call 911. My radio doesn't work. My radio doesn't work, right? They were going on us. Our faces would be plastered all over the media. These incompetent workers let people die because they didn't follow New York City Transit's rules. So, I mean, look, it's a much bigger problem than just one solution. The cameras in the station didn't work. MTA went out and lied last September. They said they wired every station, all 472 subway stations, to be videotaped 24 hours a day in case just an incident like this happens. Then they got caught with their pants down and they got exposed because none of the cameras worked in the station. And what's the response? Oh, well, those three cameras don't work. So all the other cameras work. All the millions and millions of dollars were spent to wire this with God knows what kind of corrupt contract, but only those three don't work. So, this is an ongoing social collapse that's been going on for a long time. And it's because the ruling class runs society, because the ruling class starves our communities to the things that we need to prevent these kind of tragedies from happening. You got to understand that the Democratic Party is just as corrupt as the Republican Party and is in the pocket of billionaires and has been for decades. Kathy Hochul just passed a $220 billion budget that gives $800 million to a stadium for billionaires in Buffalo. And guess who owns the concessions for the stadium? Her husband. Her daughter is a lobbyist for Big Pharma. She's taken money from every developer in the entire state, takes money from dirty energy companies. So the thing is, like, the Democrats or Republicans, it really doesn't matter because the corruption is the same in terms of that. That hasn't changed for decades.
What's the response of the GW and the unions in New York?
Nothing. Nothing.
I mean, it's laughable if I'm being kind.
Yeah.
Their response was, so endorse Hochul and all the corruption, by the way. And by the way, her lieutenant governor just got arrested on federal charges for bribery and corruption. So the day before he gets arrested, they go out and endorse her. Great timing, guys. But corruption loves corruption, right? But the response of the union so far has been to engage in a $50,000 reward for getting the perpetrator. And who do they get the $50,000 from? They share the wealth between themselves and the NYPD police fund. So here's a union that gets $35 million a year for our dues. And all they can afford is $25,000. And the only way they want to do it is if they could suck up a little more to the NYPD. And basically what they've done has been nothing but an appendage of Mayor Adams. And Mayor Adams is a sadist. He's a heartless bastard who doesn't care about homeless people. He wants to break up encampments. They're stealing their medicine. They're stealing their personal possessions. And they're just engaging in another form of vicious attack, which is what the cops always do, in the name of solving the crisis. And they're doing it at the behest of Wall Street, because all of the people who are pressuring Adams to break up these encampments, to kick them out of the subways, are all the Grand Central Partnership, all these bougie partnerships to try to further gentrify the city and make the poor unwelcome.
I'm going to bring it back 100 years and talk about, the beginnings of unions. And what we're seeing now is that unions began basically as instruments of social change, and what we have now is just bureaucracy. And the response that they've had now with this crisis, with the COVID crisis, with the current shooting, with all of the things that are going on, the homeless crisis has been in service to the ruling class and the billionaires. Transit could be fully funded. We could have homeless services. And when you talked about mental health care, is healthcare, period. We need a healthcare system in this country that covers everybody and every health issue, which we don't have. And our union isn't pushing for it. And not many unions are. Not many of your entrenched unions are pushing for that as hard as they can be. When you talk about the Democratic Party, we just endorsed Kathy Hochul. The Democrats have been in power in our state for decades, really. And in Washington, the last presidential election, took control of both the Senate, the House, and the executive branch. And yet we haven't seen any real legislation come forth that would solve these problems. The wealthy should be paying for these services because they're the ones who benefit the most from it. What the opposite is actually occurring on many fronts, where fares always on the rise, and the TA is always borrowing money from these big banks and institutions, and that money gets paid back through our tax subsidies of mass transit and through our paying fares. And then they want to increase the burden on the workers by making us work longer for less money. Each and every contract time, this is what happens. I've been here 15 years, and this is what happens. So what you're seeing is the slow erosion of what used to be a middle class in this country, because it's happening all over and everywhere. Say one of the more notable places we're seeing where what unionism is supposed to be is with Amazon. And that was from the ground up union organizing. And it was the workers themselves who took it upon themselves to organize and unionize. And our union right now is not that way.